This is The Ridge on Air.
Welcome to the lockdown edition of The Ridge on Air. I'm your host, Boo Prince, and just as much as your working situation has changed, so has ours, and even the way we produce this podcast. The entire program today has been produced and recorded remotely, so we've embraced some new working styles and technology, and we hope that you're going to enjoy the result. Now, today's episode is all about our Ridge family's experiences of learning at home and online over the last couple of months and what our boys have been up to during this time. We're going to meet a remarkable group of grade 7 Ridge boys who call themselves the Aviators South Africa and learn about an exciting project that they've started all by themselves during lockdown. And finally, I'm going to introduce you to the remarkable Jan Mallen, who used to head up the Lighthouse Learning Support Centre at school, but who is now sharing her immense skill and experience with our parents and teachers in more of a mentorship role. Now, Jan is going to be chatting to us about parent and child anxiety through this period of online learning, as well as some of the lessons that we can learn about how to take education outside, and that's especially for the junior grades in foundation phase. It's a jam-packed episode, and we're delighted to have you with us.
This is The Ridge on Air.
Okay, so a week ago, we sent out a couple of questions to you, asking about your thoughts and experiences of life through lockdown, how the world has changed, how you have changed and grown, and what things you might have learnt through this time that perhaps you wouldn't have learnt if you'd been at school. Well, we've had such a delightful response from our boys that we wanted to share some of the comments and thoughts with you on the podcast. Now, this is going to be an ongoing feature for the moment, and we'll share a few more voices later in the show as well as in future episodes. So here are the comments that were sent through to us from Amar Patel, Ben Carmichael, Sam Harwarden, Mohammed Mula, Jamie Olivier, Bradley Legg, Josh Koch, Duncan Fannykerk, Oliver Stewart, and Yazini Stephen.
You're listening to The Ridge on Air.
We have to wear masks everywhere we go, and we can't talk to people that often, and we can't stand near to people. We have to stand 2 meters away.
My dad has been the best sports coach and the worst silly teacher.
I really miss being in the classroom with all my friends and working with all of them right next to me. Working by myself and chatting in hangouts is just not the same. Some people say I love lockdown school, but I just hate it. People are saying that the future will be remote learning, but that will just never feel the same to me.
My favorite thing that I learned at home is to bake with my mom. I've also taught my 2-year-old sister to build puzzles. But most importantly, I have learned to be grateful for the little things. I have learned to think we, and not me. I've learned spending time with my family is really important.
My mum is a real teacher, so she is very strict. My dad hasn't helped me one bit. He's just worked.
Personally, even though we have had to social distance, I think it has brought us closer, not only as one family in the Koch household, but as a whole nation and world. And we've shown a lot more appreciation to things that we don't see very often.
I built a veggie farm in the back of my house, and it's where we grow chili seeds, corn seeds, and tomato seeds. We have corn and chili. The tomatoes haven't grown yet.
Dad is bad with Afrikaans. Dad makes math complicated. Mum is good at everything.
What I've learned about myself during the past 4 months is that I am really good at sleeping.
Email us at onair@ridgeschool.co.za.
Well, in this section of the podcast, I am delighted to introduce you to Kabir Budlender and Warwick Bradford, who are two grade 7s who are joining us on the line. They teamed up with Devarshan Govender and Thomas Dewar for this particular project, but Kabir and Warwick are going to tell us what they've been doing. So welcome, guys. Kabir, I'm going to just start with you. If you can give me a brief idea, what have you and your friends been doing?
Thanks for having me. So in lockdown, we were all pretty bored, and we share one common passion, which is aviation, and we enjoy seeing how the aviation field really plays out, especially during COVID-19. So a while ago, we would sit and kind of just have a discussion about a topic, and that we called our Aviators South Africa podcast. However, Warwick phoned me one day and we were all really bored, but we had this aviation news going around, getting circulated, and we thought we can do something with this. So we brought back our podcast after many months, and we have been distributing our podcast on YouTube and a lot of other platforms. And every week, the four of us get together. Sometimes it's just Warwick and I, though, and we record our podcast. And it normally entails the weekly aviation news, and we often link it back to COVID-19, for instance, because we think that's what a lot of people want to see at the moment.
Okay, and your podcast is called The Aviators South Africa. Warwick, thank you also for being with us. Can you give us a little bit of an insight into how your podcast has been received?
It's been received very well. We have been getting not too much feedback at the moment, but we can see our base is building now. We're getting more views much more quickly. So we can definitely see the base is building, and it's not just random people who come on once or twice. It's people who are coming on repetitively.
Okay, so this is fantastic. I'm so proud of you guys, and I just think it's so inspiring to see you using this period in your lives to do something so constructive and so creative and so amazing. And when I listened to your podcast, I was really struck by the thoughtfulness and the maturity with which you guys have approached so many topics. And I was hoping that you could share with us a snippet from one of your podcasts in June that was particularly special. So let's take a listen to that.
As most of you all know, the Black Lives Matter movement is happening all over the world. We realize that continuing to release our weekly content with no mention or support for the movement that is happening around the world is not the right thing to do.
With that in mind, we thought that we would bring you a special episode to commemorate Youth Day in South Africa and the Black Lives Matter movement around the world. Our weekly aviation shout-out initiative was to bring people together and not apart. Today we'll be bringing you our first winners of the weekly aviation shout-out.
Aviation, like many other professions, does not reflect the diversity in the world. It used to be that only men would become pilots. However, when women started to appear in the aviation industry, it was a big step. We must realize, though, that we are not done transforming the aviation community. We need to have many more women pilots and pilots of color.
Another reason for the lack of diversity with aviation is the fact that you have to be privileged to be able to afford flight training. This makes it difficult for people from disadvantaged backgrounds to get into the aviation industry. Aviation is just one profession that is disadvantaged. There are so many more, including being disadvantaged in schools and other places of work.
We want you, our viewers, to know that the Aviators South Africa team supports the Black Lives Matter movement and supports getting the youth of Africa to become the future aviators, pilots, cabin crew, aeronautical engineers, and the people leading and transforming the aviation industry of tomorrow.
Well, I think that is absolutely fantastic. Warwick and Kabir, thank you so much for sharing your incredible project with us. That's Kabir Budlender and Warwick Bradford. They are the Aviators South Africa, along with their classmates Devarshan Govender and Thomas Dewar. And my understanding is that Thomas Dewar even composes the music for the podcast, which is just spectacular. Can you guys give us the address or where we can find your podcast so that our Ridge community can tune in and support you?
So every week all of our episodes are released on YouTube. So if you'd like to see our YouTube videos, you can go to youtube.com/the Aviators South Africa. So otherwise you can go onto YouTube and search for the Aviators South Africa. It does come up.
Otherwise, on Spotify, Anchor FM, Google Podcasts, you can also just search for the Aviators South Africa, and the podcast is listed over there.
Thank you so much.
Music at the Ridge.
OnAir.
Oh, doesn't the sound of our boys' happy voices and the joy of an exuberant marimba practice session just fill up your heart? I absolutely love it. So thank you so much to Mr. Simon Charinge, who many of you will know as a dedicated and brilliant member of our Ridge School Music Department, for allowing me to sneak into the marimba practice earlier this year, way before lockdown, and record that session. It was so much fun. And I must say that the sound of the marimbas is one of those sounds of our precious school that I personally miss the most and absolutely can't wait to hear again. Okay, so let's catch up on another round of voice notes from our boys at home now. And these comments come to us from Ben Alberts, Chris Chapman, Matthew Smith, Lungam Tambo, Matteo De Gennaro, Christopher Bowling, Jonathan Schwegman, and Ed Carmichael.
My mom's worst teaching is maths because she doesn't have any patience and she explains it wrong. My dad is not good at languages, not even English or Zulu.
What I think has changed the most for me is not being in a group of people. So it's like you have to keep social distance from everyone and you can't see anyone except for your mum, dad and sisters.
My dad is so good at maths. He has helped me with lots of my work and I couldn't have done it without him. But for English and Afrikaans, I think I should rather go to my mum because she is brilliant.
I learned how to work more independently and organize when I'm going to do assignments and when.
I can still be connected to my friends and teachers through Google Meet.
I think being in lockdown is very nice because I get to be with my family and I get to do online classes and stuff.
I believe the world has changed drastically, and that's everything has changed. The way we live, the way we behave, and the ways of surviving. Because people are saying we'll be going back to normal soon, but I think we need a new normal.
I've learned to make some delicious fudge for everyone. Bye, guys.
Email us at onair@ridgeschool.co.za.
Well, as promised, I am going to introduce you to the absolutely brilliant and delightful Mrs. Jan Mallen. Now, many of you will know Jan from your interactions at school. For those of you who perhaps don't know Jan Mallen, let me just give you a little bit of background on her, because we are so extraordinarily privileged to have someone of her caliber as an incredible resource at the school for us to draw on. So, Mrs. Mallen has had a very distinguished career in education. She was the former head of Rodine School for 15 years. She also has headed up the Lighthouse Learning Support Centre at the Ridge, and her tenure came to an end at the end of last year so that she could this year begin to focus on mentorship of staff and parents, and also just really play a more active role in school consulting. So she consults to a number of different schools. And Jan is also involved in an extraordinary initiative which is called Children in the Wilderness. And we're going to touch on this in the interview because there are so many incredibly important things for us to learn about different styles of education as we go through this incredibly uncertain period in our own lives. Welcome, Jan Mallen. I am delighted to have you on the show today. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here with you.
So, Jan, I know that you've had an incredibly interesting couple of months through lockdown because aside from your other work, you have also played an incredibly important role in terms of parental support. Can you give us a little bit of insight into what that has looked like and some of the major concerns that parents have raised with you through this period?
I think to start off with, I would say it has been a very interesting learning curve for us all. And what has really struck us is the level of vulnerability that parents have been prepared to communicate their concerns and the positive aspects of having their children at home for much longer periods of time. Certainly, there are deep levels of anxiety, but I think what has been very helpful, both for myself and for parents, is that we've been able to explore much of what that anxiety is about. And that goes really largely to, am I as a parent doing enough on a daily basis? And I think that creates often a huge conflict because you're anticipating your child to work at the pace that you want him to work at. And children generally do not want to work at that pace. And one has to start learning and realizing that often an hour or an hour and a half of real focus, particularly in the core skills, in numeracy and literacy, is an enormous amount, and they will have achieved what they need to achieve for the day.
Now, Jan, I just have a million questions about this. I mean, first of all, I realize that, it's not only us as parents who are feeling anxiety, it's also our kids are feeling this tremendous anxiety. And I mean, certainly in my home, I've had days where we've escalated each other, and I've spoken to many other mums and dads who've also said, there've been a lot of tears along the way. How do we manage that anxiety, both our own and that of our children?
I think at times, realistically, there are going to be tears because sometimes it just overflows and conflict does develop. But I think the important thing around that is how one resolves it and tries to learn how to work with it. One of the things that both myself and Candice Fletcher, who's the psychologist at the Ridge who I'm working with, is that we've talked quite a lot about how you set up as a family a schedule, not just the school schedule, but your own schedule for you and for your child. It really helps with the self-regulation of how much they can and can't do. Sometimes it's better to do the essential tasks, which again are your mathematics and the English. And then if you don't manage all the other tasks, rather do a let go and move on into perhaps some home creative task.
Now, Jan, that's
Yes.
such a powerful thing. Let's talk for just a second about the value of some of the things that our sons are learning during this period at home with us as parents and in the family context that perhaps they wouldn't have the opportunity to learn in the classroom.
Well, I think that's a very valid point. The ideas of how a house runs, how they help with household tasks, cooking, baking, learning about a garden. There are so many skills that parents can develop that children may be interested in. If you're an engineer, you can start thinking about if your child's interested in something in the garden, how do you build this? How do you make that? How do you grow this? And I'm very positive about thinking and how you can journal many of those activities as a shared family, not just the child doing it, but as a family unit. There's so many things that I think are able to develop your child's interest in the world. And just asking very simple questions. You know, there's running water in the house. So where does the water come from? And how lucky are we to have water? What happens to children who don't have water? That I think very often we are returning back to, in many ways, a very simple way of life, but at the same time, there's a layer of complexity because we are doing so much of our learning and socializing through technology. But there is such a strong and positive aspect, I believe, of joy and hope that can really build, I think, optimism and lessen the anxiety in your child, because there's no doubt as parents, the more you can manage your own anxiety, the more strong your children are going to be. That's one of the very strong messages we've been working with in our parent support forum.
Now, Jan, I keep feeling like there are opportunities through this period for our kids to discover their own passions and their own expertise and so on. And so often when their passions develop, a lot of their learning skills develop because they are driven by a passion to understand more about a particular subject. And equally, like you're talking about, the opportunity to learn outside. And I wanted to use this moment with you to just explore what you have learned from your work with children in the wilderness, how you create that classroom outside under the trees. You know, we tend to think that is an impoverished learning space, but it turns out that actually, in many ways, it's an incredibly rich learning space.
So I think I have learned through my own experience of being in these areas that it absolutely is a very rich learning experience, because most of the time your classrooms have a chalkboard, possibly concrete blocks for ventilation. The children often don't have much stationery. So many of the lessons are outside, largely under trees for shade. But what we do is we use sandy areas, and we do a lot of our English, our alphabet work, our letter formation using the sand. And what is so interesting is how incredibly able, it's because it's tactile as well. And if each child gets their own area, their page of space in the sand, they can write. We develop words, because there's a lot of chanting used in their learning. We use that auditory skill to actually develop sounds, to develop songs, to develop how we make up sentences and words. And then similarly with number work, we're using sticks to do all of that, or our fingers, which is very important for your early development. And then we will use stones for a lot of our number work, where we either are adding stones together or doing drawings in the sand, or using different sizes of stones to do volume and measurement, similarly with sticks. And it's quite extraordinary how much you can learn doing all those things. And so much study and research shows that in early development of both literacy and numeracy, if you are actually working outside and using your body in the work and concretely learning the number, your levels of number work will escalate, and your understanding of number will be far greater all your life.
So perhaps we should be asking ourselves how we can translate the curriculum and the lessons and stuff to the outside of our homes. You know, I'm suddenly, as you're talking, I'm having visions of doing maths on the driveway with a giant piece of chalk, or counting out nuts or leaves, or I don't know, building dams from mud, and just those very kind of tactile, messy things, which are children's natural learning ground anyway.
I think all of those things are extraordinarily valuable. Hopscotches, blocks, using leaves and patterns of leaves and how you arrange leaves, because patterning is a very important part of number work in your early skills. And of course, we also do use water. So we'll have a little contingent of children who'll go with a wheelbarrow to the well, and then we'll measure how many steps they've taken to get to the well and back, and we'll use measuring and distance, and then the different sizes of the water containers they have to use volume and water. Similarly, even with things like tree climbing, we use that as a thing of how high is the tree? How far did I climb? What would happen if I dropped off? How far did I jump?
One of the things that we've been doing a lot on walks around the neighborhood is collecting different seed pods and figuring out how do they disperse and, you know, which seeds fly, which hop, which burst.
Which is wonderful.
And it's amazing.
Absolutely wonderful.
Jan, just finally, because we're unfortunately out of time, I could talk to you for hours. Can you just give us a few words of wisdom for those parents who just need a little bit of extra encouragement, who maybe are just feeling overwhelmed?
Sure. Well, I think the important thing just with everything that we've reflected on today is that by doing many of those activities that are outside and not behind a screen, they are very good ways of lessening your anxiety, building good contact with your children, and loving contact that doesn't have a task around it. Because I think we still are quite task-driven, and that's often what makes one feel as a parent, am I doing enough? Am I good enough? Am I coping with that? Never think that it isn't learning. All of those things are learning. Every conversation that every time you read to your child is learning. There's never a moment that your child can be bored, because there are so many small things that you can build interest in that can really start for all of you as a family, can hold you together, because it is not easy. And particularly as mums and dads, you need to be the positive anchor for them to feel enthusiastic and vibrant about everything in life. This is their other incredibly exciting learning space, and it's yours as a parent. And you're going to have moments with your child that you will probably never have. They'll always have been relayed from school. Now you're actually doing it with them. And I think that's, for me, the kinds of philosophy and attitude that we have to hold on to. And perhaps just as a last thing, if you want to at any point join our Parents Forum, it's from 3:30 to 4:30, actually on a Thursday afternoon. You just need to connect with Candace Fletcher, and we're available to chat to you. And it really is right across the school. It's turning out to be a very, very positive framework, and one where one can be vulnerable and share how we're feeling, which is very important as well.
Jan, thank you so much for being with us. So forgive yourself, enjoy the time with your children, get outside, enjoy the learning adventure. I love that idea, the learning adventure of the home and the garden.
And thank you, Boo, for the opportunity to chat about something that I love so much.
Well, your passion comes through so much in the way you speak, Jan, and we're so fortunate as a school community to have you to mentor and guide us. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Boo. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thanks.
The Ridge on Air.
Well, that's it for this episode of The Ridge on Air. Thank you for being with us. And our next episode will be coming out very, very soon. And we're hoping to feature the voices of our teachers and some more of our parents. We're looking for comments from our parents and teachers who have had to adjust to this entirely new way of learning. So do send us your comments, any questions, any ideas. Zap them to us at onair@ridgeschool.co.za, and voice notes, please do send through to us on WhatsApp on the number 083 601 7903. The Ridge On Air is brought to you by Prince Media. Voiceover, media coaching and podcast services. Visit princemedia.co.za for more.